Whenever we're talking about overcoming depression or destroying depression, we're talking specifically about using pattern interrupts. And today we're going to learn why that is effective and what you should be trying to do in order to make that happen. Okay, first of all, I'd like to define depression so that we all know exactly what it is we're talking about. Depression, anxiety, all that stuff has become kind of buzzwordy in our culture and in our society, so it's been a lot. It seems like there are some people who are told that they might have depression who don't, and some people who do have depression who it's mitigated, and some people don't actually make it as serious a deal as it is. So for the purpose of this course, I'd like to go ahead and make sure that we clearly define when we're talking about depression in here, what are we talking about? So if anybody sees anybody show up, let me know and I'll go get the door. But all right, so depression, it's a noun. We're talking about feelings of severe despondency and dejection, okay? Now, however that is something that relates to you, I want you to kind of think about how that would relate to a client or to yourself. Have you ever felt feelings of severe despondency and dejection? We would categorize that as a depressive mental state, even if you don't technically have clinical depression yet. Those feelings in general are considered feelings of depression, okay? Now, clinical depression is an actual mental health disorder characterized by persistently depressed mood or loss of interest in activities causing significant impairment in daily life. The purpose of defining these terms is because by establishing linguistic frames of reference, we can better assess whether a client, acquaintance, or even we ourselves are experiencing some variation of depression, and if we have identified it, then that is a good time to utilize the pattern interrupts, okay? So that's the whole purpose of this. Now, when we're talking about pattern interrupts, it's easiest to just talk about these in terms of a vague, ambiguous positive mental state or a negative mental state. So really what we're defining is this idea of depression. Most of the time, I think we can all agree that depression is a state that most people would consider a negative mental state. Has anybody else experienced that somebody said that depression was a good thing? I've never had that. I've never had somebody come to me and go, yeah, depression's actually doing some good things for me, and so I'm not really sure I want to let it go. Most of the time when they come to me, they're like, no, I want it gone. I can't think of anything good it does for me. So we can.
The only thing I can think of is that sometimes people realize that it motivated them to make a change.
To make a change.
To get rid of it.
Absolutely. And so from time to time we can say that if something's causing us anxiety or making us feel depressed, we may change that. So it might be something like if you're not eating healthy, you're eating donuts every morning and you feel like that's not a really good thing for me. I'm depressed about that, about those choices, so I'd like to make a different choice. You could say that, right?
Something oranges.
Something a bipolar person might say is that they're going to get some sleep now.
Oh yeah, sure. So you might say that depression leads me to just shut the world out, cover up, go to sleep, and at least if nothing else, I'm going to get some sleep. Sure. Okay. So we most of the time would consider this a negative emotional state, but as you can see here, we want to make sure that we clearly identify that it is a negative emotional state and clearly identify the positive emotional states for this person. I have been working with an online client and I asked her what she wanted to feel, the opposite of depression, and she said just neutral, just content. I don't need to be super happy and excited and full of joy. I just want to be neutral. I just don't want to feel horrible. Everything doesn't have to be good. And I was like, is that what you want? She said, yes. So for her, the positive emotional state she wanted was contentment, just neutral. Okay?
And I think what you're talking about with someone with bipolar disorder with that diagnosis is it's not so much that they want to feel depressed, it's they're just so far in the other extreme and it's making them uncomfortable and they just want that reduced.
Exactly.
Sure.
Been up for 3 to 5 days and it's like, oh, you need to get some sleep.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So
there's alternative ways to get sleep.
Right. Exactly. Right. Can I go back to that one really quickly, Neil? So one of the ways of the NLP techniques used to help someone rapidly break out of a negative emotional state is called a pattern interrupt. So that's what we're going to be introducing today. By mapping the client's emotional state, we can define only sensations correlating to that emotional state, whether it's positive or negative. So oftentimes, rather than asking the person, what's causing you to feel depressed? We can ask them to describe the emotional state of depression. How does it feel in the body? Does it feel like weight or a heaviness? Does it feel like it's pushing you back into the wall? Does it feel like it's pressing you down into the ground? Just describe the feeling, just the kinesthetic feelings. I don't want to know what's causing it. I just want to know what it feels like, okay? That's mapping it. Yeah, absolutely. So once both patterns are mapped, once you know the way the positive emotion makes someone feel, once you know the way the negative emotional state makes them feel, that means you've mapped them. Okay, you've clearly mapped them. You know what they look like, what they sound like, what they feel like.
What do you do when you have someone who's really depressed and they feel so depressed that they're like, I don't even remember what it feels like to feel undepressed, not depressed?
Not depressed. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll clearly map out the depression, that state. And so I'll ask them, are there any images that pop into your mind when you think about this state of depression? Do you see yourself somewhere? Do you have a mental image that comes to your mind? Oftentimes I have to be careful because this will stimulate them talking about what's causing the depression. I don't want to know that. I just want a representation. So just give me the representation that pops into your head. Are there any sounds associated with it? When you think about the sounds, are they loud, like they're external, like they're coming from the outside, or are they like they're internal, like you can almost feel that they're coming from the inside of you? Is it in your voice or is it in someone else's voice? What's the speed of it? How intense is it? Different things like that. And then the feeling, describe the feeling to me. A lot of people have said it feels like an anchor, like a weight inside of their chest, like it's pushing them down into the ground. Some people feel like it's pushing them back into the wall. Some people say it's like a cyclone, like a vortex, that it spins around in them, like it's sucking them inside of themselves. Whatever it is, let's map it out. Once I get it fully mapped, and I've got a visual, an auditory, and a kinesthetic representation, then I say, okay, now I want you to forget about that, and I want you to describe to me what you want to feel. Even if you've never felt it before, how would you like to feel? And sometimes you're right. Sometimes they can't even recall that. And I go, great, no problem. Imagine it. Just imagine what it would be like if you woke up tomorrow and all your problems would solve. Describe that to me. What visual do you have come to your mind then? What do you have? Are there any sounds associated? Are there any feelings associated with it? How would you feel? If you could feel the way you wanted to, what would that be like? So what we've done now is we've mapped their positive representation of themselves. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So that once we've done that, we can use two different pattern interrupts. One is called the have-want technique, which I'll introduce you to today. I created that one based upon neuro-linguistic programming studies, or kinesthetic mapping technique. Both rely on strategic questions, okay? So this is all about asking questions. How does that look? How does it feel? How does it sound to you? And getting a clear description from that person, okay? All right, identifying emotions, kinesthetic representations. So I chose these two because they have almost nothing to do with the topic of depression. So I wanted to be able to give two clear emotional states that people can be in without those actually generating feelings of depression. So the first one is joy. Whenever we see joy on someone's face, typically these are the emotional micro-expressions that you can see. Muscles around the eyes are tightened. Those are called the orbicularis oculi. The crow's feet, wrinkles around the eyes. The cheeks raised, that's the zygomatic major. And the lip corners are raised diagonally. Okay, that's typically what you can see when somebody is experiencing joy. If they're in that state, that's going to give them a kinesthetic feeling in their body, and you could ask them, when you're feeling joy, when you feel that state of joy, do you have something that pops in your mind immediately? Is it a visual? Do you have any sounds associated with that? Are there any feelings associated with that idea of joy? Okay, and that would be an example of mapping that out. Anger, the eyebrows are pulled down, upper lids pulled up, lower lids pulled up, margins of the lips are rolled in, the lips may be tightened. This is some of the courses that are used with Dr. Paul Ekman, who teaches people how to read micro-expressions, and that's where I got these diagrams from. And this specific science is kind of separate from what we're doing, but I'm just giving you an idea so that you can identify what we consider a negative emotional state and what we would consider a positive emotional state. Okay, and so you could actually see these on the eyes of your clients, or you can see this on your own face looking in the mirror a lot of times. You can tell what emotional state you're in.
So I do a lot of anger management, so when I talk to my clients about this, I focus on 4 other areas that I'll mention briefly too, as far as anger goes. But I talk about the jaws locking, because when people feel angry, your muscles tense up, so your jaw muscles tense up, so you see people and their teeth are clenched. Sometimes they don't even open their mouth while they're speaking. I also talk about, you're not necessarily going to be able to see this one on someone, but the heart pounding like the hammer in the chest. you know, your adrenaline gets going and it just feels like it's about to pop out of your chest. But a couple other that, well, another one that you could actually see is lots of times the fist clench, because when people feel angry, lots of times they either go into the fight or flight mode, and if they're going to have to fight, their fists are going to ball. And you even see that sometimes. We, Vic and I work with a family, and the client that you work with in that family, that was the issue with the parents, was the daughter had gotten angry and she balled her fist up and cocked her arm back and threatened it to hit the mom. And then the last one that I talk about with anger, and I'm teaching them to recognize when they're starting to feel angry based on the feelings in their body and stuff, but is feeling like your stomach's in knots. And the reason for that, that goes back to the fight or flight, because normally when you're in a normal state, your body is sending blood to your intestines to get the nutrients to take it to all the cells, to feed all the cells in your body and stuff. But when you go into that fight or flight mode, your body redirects the amount of blood going there, and it sends it to your major muscle systems, primarily your legs and your arms, in case if you do have to flee so that you can run away, or if you have to fight so that you can hit and kick and fight.
Absolutely. Yep.
What is the intern's name?
Kimberly?
All right, let's go ahead and advance
right.
to the next slide. Okay, so this was an actual government study done, and this is a diagram that I extracted from that government study, and you can go to this website here if you want to look at this study. But this was self-reporting, okay? So they did a study where they took people from all genders, all races, and they asked them, based upon an emotional state, how do you feel the temperature change in your body? And this was the reported emotional mapping of what people reported through all genders. This is what they got. So emotions coordinate our behavior and physiological states during survival, salient events, and pleasurable interactions. Even though we are often consciously aware of our current emotional state, such as anger or joy, the mechanisms giving rise to these subjective sensations have remained unresolved. Does that make sense? Like, even though we know when we feel it, we don't always know how we got there.
Right.
Okay? So, here we used a topographical self-report tool to reveal
I was looking at
that.
Shane.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like Spider-Man.
Yeah, right? And does that feel like, do you see that in the cheeks?
Yeah.
Like, could you imagine if you felt that, how that would feel? And so,
But anger and pride, look how similar they are.
super similar, right?
That got me, like, what?
And then, what did Neil say about anger? About the fists tightening?
Yeah, that's one of
And
the
stuff
bigger
like
difference.
that? Do we see that anywhere else? Happiness slightly here, right? But happiness is radiating heat everywhere,
Different feeling,
right?
yeah.
And it's a different type of heat. This one's like that searing.
It's like a happy heat.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a searing heat.
And
That's
the
right.
You
difference
notice
that
happiness is like the whole body.
The whole body, right?
Better
Yeah.
than love.
Yeah.
look at depression.
Love
It's
is
like
only some of the body.
Yeah.
Depression like the
feels
whole
like
body,
like
too.
a hole.
Mhm.
Like your body runs out of blood.
And
Like
that's
it's.
like when you describe depression, when I see it, it feels like that because to me it's a black hole.
Yes.
And it's just sucking me in and I can't,
That's
when I was.
the one time that I felt depression where I was like, oh, this is what people are
Yeah.
describing.
It's an empty.
It felt
emptiness and-
like an infinity loop,
Right, like-
from my head to and across the center to here. It felt like it was pulling me
Pulling
in,
it in.
like I just wanted to disappear into myself.
And that is a good description, like a black hole, because it's
Mhm.
like the black hole sucks in all the energy. And that's
Everything.
why the person doesn't even have the energy to get out of bed or to do anything.
Right.
Check out neutral,
Neutral. Yeah, just almost nothing. Like just fine.
which is really, I mean, how we feel most of the time.
Yeah.
Unless we, you know.
Find ourselves
For
in
some
one
other
of these drastic states. Right.
It's the lemmings.
That's
I
right.
think
Yeah. Yeah. Just going along. Right.
It's
Yeah.
interesting between anger and pride that, like you mentioned, in anger it's down in the arms and
Mhm.
wrists and stuff, but pride it's like
It's all in that
it's like
chest.
puffed up in
Yes,
the chest,
yes.
you know, like the
Yeah,
person
yeah,
with the
puffed up
puffed
in
up
the
chest,
chest.
and
Mhm.
all
'Cause even
pride
their
in their
face
head, you know,
is-
big
yeah.
head, you know.
Yeah. And look at the similarity between pride and anxiety with that heat there in that chest region. And happiness even has that same heat in the chest. So anyway, it's interesting that reporting-wise, that this was across the board, this was primarily what most people experienced.
It's really cool to see
and it's a self-report tool, okay? All right, so I just wanted everyone to recognize and realize that people are capable. This is a self-report tool. People are capable of identifying how they feel when they're in those emotional states and describing those accurately to a level that we can create a topographical map that indicates what they're feeling.
And thankfully they're teaching it in schools when we start kids' school.
Mm-hmm.
The sooner we can identify these feelings, the sooner we can learn to manage
Absolutely.
them.
Most people aren't ever given the opportunity to map out their emotions and to realize that they do have different emotions, that kinesthetic feelings that go along with these emotional states.
And that's one thing that we do as therapists is we help people realize this and stuff, but then we try to bring it back a step and say, okay, well, what was happening right before that? What triggered that?
Yeah.
You know, what happened? What was your thought? What triggered that? So that, because if they can start to realize that a step earlier, and they can either try to stay away from triggering events, or once they realize something just happened to me that triggered me, can you change your thought to change your emotional state?
And that modality, the second modality you just described, is more in line with neurolinguistic programming. Neurolinguistic programming very rarely goes back to the trigger. And most of the time we go to, okay, once you've mapped that and you know that now this is anger, now let's map across to an opposite feeling. Break that pattern now that you're feeling it, because we set that emotional state by getting them to recall it. So think about the anger. Describe it to me. How does it feel? When you do that, it begins to activate that emotional state. They find themselves in it while they're describing it. The brain's recalling it and bringing it back. So then we interrupt that pattern with that positive emotional state that we map out. And then we do it again, several times. It's kinesthetic mapping across, okay? And what's happening in that process is the brain is retraining itself to have a new method, a new pattern to follow, so that next time I feel anger, oh wait, this feels better than the anger. This resolution is a better result for my brain than the anger was. The anger wasn't getting me the outcome I wanted. This gets me the outcome I want. And you're able to learn that in real time. The brain does it subconsciously rather than consciously adopting a new model. You're teaching the brain by switching it back and forth from the negative to the positive.
Sometimes when we do this in therapy, when we're working with young kids who don't have the verbal skills to describe this type of stuff, so sometimes we want to see how they behave when they are. So if a parent's bringing a child to therapy because they have anger management issues, and maybe they're like really young, like 3, 4, and they don't have the language to describe it, we are going to set up a situation in order to provoke that anger in that child, so we can see what's actually happening with this child when they get angry.
Absolutely. Yep.
And then, in a controlled environment, and then to be able to help them, let that anger out appropriately, right? Bring the intensity level down and stuff like that.
You always have to have a playhouse.
Yes.
And lots of little guys to represent their family.
There you go. Yeah. Actually, that's a really powerful model laid out by Virginia Satir in Gestalt therapy. And it's super powerful, very, very powerful modality. And we're going to get into a little bit in this presentation why that works. And the reason it works is activating mirror neurons through visualizing the outcomes. And so let's advance the slide and continue on. That may be next, actually. Okay, setting a positive emotional state. Imagine or recall a time in your life when you were truly proud of yourself. Now, when I practice neurolinguistic programming with a client or out in public, whatever, the first thing I want to do is not get that negative emotional state. I actually want to set a positive emotional state. A lot of times therapists will do this through teaching breathing techniques, having people find a safe space inside of their mind, whether that's a beach or a field or something. Might even be their home and their bed. That might be the place where they feel most at peace. Whatever it is, we want to set that positive emotional state first. That's my primary. That way I can recall it whenever I want or whenever I need. So imagine or recall a time in your life when you were truly proud of yourself. Maybe you accomplished something great or achieved a goal. And I want you to go there now. In your own mind, try to find that. Try to find that feeling when you were truly proud of yourself for accomplishing the goal. Think now about how that felt. And no matter what the intensity is, do your best to just increase it just a little bit. So if you feel it right now on a scale from 1 to 10 and it's about a 5 or so, I want you to try to crank it up. Try to see if you can just increase it just a little. And once you do that, let me know, just with a nod, if you were able to change it, alter it, if you were able to feel it.
Not at this time.
Not at this time, that's okay. So we want to be able to try to do that. So we want to be able to try to set that positive emotional state. That's my initial, this is a typical way that I'll do that. I'll do that through just saying, hey, imagine a time in your life, and then I'll have them give that to me. What was that moment? What was that time in your life? And how do you know that you felt proud of yourself? How do you know that that was a feeling that you had? I want them to really increase that belief system and really get a hold of that emotional state. And we're going to come back to that anytime we need to throughout the session.
The moment I picked was the moment that I was like most proud in my life. So I couldn't even imagine being like feeling more proud.
What moment was that?
It was when I passed my flight test to get my private pilot certification.
Awesome.
So I just landed with the tester.
Right.
I passed, and so then I could take passengers up with me, because with my student certification I could fly myself, but I couldn't have passengers.
Sure.
Unless I had a flight instructor with me.
Right.
And so, you know, right after I landed, I took someone up for a flight for the first time, just me and that person. You know,
And
that was just
super
so
proud
exciting.
moment, right? And whenever you describe that, how was that tactile sensation in your body? Was it like a feeling of feeling light and free and floating, or can you describe and put that into words, articulate that?
It wasn't so much floating; it's like more energy.
Energy.
Just like coursing through my body. Just
And
like
did it
the
feel like it
excitement.
radiated out from center outward?
Yes.
And so that right there is just a little bit of kinesthetic mapping. Just trying to get an idea of that representation, that tactile sensation that flows throughout the nervous system. Okay? Great.
Ready?
Yes, sir. Sorry. All right, so don't attempt this portion of the exercise just yet if you've been diagnosed with clinical depression. Okay, so this is just a portion of this that I want you to experience this going from a positive state to a negative state if you never have, or just to get an idea of this. But if you've been diagnosed with clinical depression, this is probably not a good exercise for you to just jump into before you understand the outcome. Okay, so this has an outcome in mind. Now imagine a time you felt ashamed. Think about how it feels in your body to feel shame. Sometimes some people associate this with guilt. If you've ever stolen gum, lied, or cheated at cards, this may be the right state. Okay? So that's the state that we want to acknowledge and accept and just kind of map that out. How does that feel? That negative emotional state. I stole a piece of gum and a dollar bill out of a girl's purse when I was in 5th grade on a dare, and I got in super big trouble. And when I think about that shame and that guilt, and I feel that now, and I'm so thankful for it, because it was a huge moment in my life to where it was like, okay, when someone dares you, that's not a good reason to do anything, ever. Like, you have to actually look at the thing that you're being asked to do and see if it's something you really want to do. A dare is not a good reason, right? So this was an excellent lesson for me, but I think about that feeling of shame when I got caught. That moment when it was obvious that everybody was pointing at me and you stole, you're a thief. And it happened again a few months later whenever I was alone in my classroom and I was getting my pencil. We were on recess, I was going into my desk to get my pencil to go out and write my sentences, and the janitor, the custodian, was coming by, and she saw me in the classroom and she stopped and goes, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm getting a pencil." And she knew that I had just gotten in trouble for stealing. So the immediate assumption was, I'm in this classroom to steal, right? And I felt it again. I felt that shame. And I wasn't doing anything wrong. I hadn't done anything wrong. And I felt that same exact emotion, that tactile sensation, that burning in the cheeks. I'm feeling it right now. Like that shame and everything that I felt, right? So I want everyone to notice the change in state from feeling proud of yourself, from feeling accomplished and like you've done something great, to that shift and how you feel whenever that shift occurs. Okay? All right, so let's continue on. All right, stop it. Stop it. Shake that off. Really, shake it off. Whatever that emotion was, that feeling of shame and guilt, we want to get rid of that right now. Forget that sensation. Let it go. Let yourself come back to a place of balance and peace. Okay? Now, recall that time now when you were totally proud of yourself again. Remember that sensation. Remember, we just felt it. You were proud of your behavior, your intellect, your drive. No matter what it was, consider that feeling, okay? Now embrace how it feels in your body to experience pride in yourself and what you've accomplished. You just experienced a limbic system pattern interrupt. You went from a positive state to a negative state back to a positive state, okay? That's what you should have just experienced. Now, why does this work? What do we need to talk about? The 4 stages of the learning process. We're going to go through this relatively quickly.
Were you here before, at the presentation before when we talked about this?
About the 4 stages of the learning process?
Yeah, that was
okay.
familiar.
Awesome. So unconscious incompetence is we don't know what we don't know. That's the first stage, okay? We all go through 4 stages of the learning process, no matter what the topic is, no matter what we're trying to learn. What we're trying to learn today is how to break negative patterns unconsciously, subconsciously, in our own minds and in the minds of our clients. We're trying to do that. So what state we need to get to in order for that to happen is all the way to here, to where we're in unconscious competence. But in order for that to happen rapidly in one session, we're going to have to train the brain quickly, really quickly, okay? So we go from a place of unconscious incompetence. So this person, chances are, whoever we're working with, whether it's ourselves or whether this is a client, chances are whenever we begin mapping our emotions, this has never happened before. This person has probably never had this experience of somebody asking them, how does it feel? Do you have any visuals that come to mind? Are there any sounds associated with this emotional state? Chances are this has never happened. They've never actually considered what led up to this event, what causes these feelings, what they actually are, describing them, mapping them out. Chances are it's never happened. So they don't know what they don't know.
So
Never even experienced this.
If you're telling them like what this is called, this may be the first time they've heard mapping your emotions. And they may be like, what is that?
Right.
I've never heard of this before.
And chances are they probably never actually sat down and asked themselves, what is this feeling? When they're...
I don't tell them that, I just do it, and
Right.
they're like, whoa.
Yeah, right?
That's really cool, or that's,
Yes.
that doesn't feel good.
Right, yeah, and it's the first time that they're cognitively connecting to something that's normally an unconscious
They're just like,
thing.
I just thought I was that Hindu person. Or something.
Yeah, right, yeah, see? I did this with my 8-year-old son one time after he got mad about Legos. He couldn't figure out how to assemble these Legos, and he was pissed. And so he just set it down. He set down the Legos and was just like, screw it, that doesn't work. And I said, hang on, are you sure it doesn't work, or are you sure maybe you weren't just looking at it the wrong way? And he said, no, it just doesn't work. I said, okay, is it okay if I look at it and I try it? And he didn't say anything. I could tell he was mad. So I went ahead and tried it, and I did it, and I said, oh, here it is, buddy. This is what you were doing. You were just looking at it this way, and you had it turned around in your mind. This is how it goes together. And he just goes, And I was just like, is it okay for you to acknowledge that I did get it, and that it does work and it's okay? And he just goes, why do you need me to say that? And I said, oh, no. I don't need you to say that. I kind of feel like that you need you to say that.
You need to hear it.
And he wouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, and I just let it go. I just said, okay, no problem.
He knew.
Oh yeah. So later on, he was taking a bath, and I knock on the door and I say, hey man, you mind if I come in and talk to you for a minute? He said, sure. So I come in and I said, listen, I know earlier that you got frustrated and you got upset. Would you like to talk about that? He said, no. I said, okay. I said, no problem. I don't want to talk about what led up to it. I just want to talk about what you were feeling in that moment. Can you describe what you felt? And he said, it felt like there was a heat that went about 75% over my head and I couldn't control it. He said, I don't know what it is, but when that heat comes in my head, if it comes only halfway and I notice it, I can get it to go away. He said, but once it goes all the way over, I can't control it. And I was like, well, what you're describing is anger, son. I said, what you're describing is the way that you feel anger. I said, now, who's in control of that whenever it gets to the 50% and you can make it go back down? Who's in control of that?
You are the person.
He said, oh, I guess I am. I said, so what makes you incapable of controlling it once it gets past here? And he says, I don't think there's anything keeping me from controlling it. And I said, so even if it goes that far, do you think now you would be able to control it? And he says, yeah, I think I can. So ever since then, he's been able to control his anger a whole lot better, because it was in that moment he realized that he was in control of it the whole time. Okay? So he didn't know what he didn't know, though, right? So unconscious incompetence.
So that's one of the questions I ask kids when I work with them with anger management. I have them tell me about the time when they felt mildly angry and the time when they felt severely angry. And then I say, what's the difference?
What's the difference?
How do you know when you're only mildly angry? How do you know when you're severely angry? And how do you respond? And why is it different?
And when you're asking those questions, is the purpose to find out if the child thinks it's environmental or if it's internal?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I do, a thermometer picture,
Mhm.
thermometer.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it goes up and down, this is your thermometer, you can control it.
Yes,
This
very
is
good.
What do you do when it's this high? What do you do when it's this high? What
Very good.
A lot
So
of times it's all the same, and
and-
I'm just like, well,
in your experience in working with others, is someone more capable of change more rapidly if they feel like that the feelings are external and part of the environment, or if they're internal and part of their construct?
what was the question at the beginning?
Whenever you see more productive growth more rapidly,
Internal.
it's internal, right?
Sure.
It's when the person's able to identify that this emotion, this feeling is actually me. It's coming from me, I'm generating it, I'm producing it. Whenever people feel like it's externally imposed as part of the environment, it's much harder for that person to be able to get control over this.
So I do believe in taking personal responsibility and stuff.
Absolutely.
But I also teach people that when you're feeling something negative, look for the external causes.
Mm-hmm.
But when something good happens, look within yourself. What did I do to cause this or contribute to this?
That's great.
Or whatever. But of course, if you get too far on those extremes on the spectrum, that's how you get like a narcissistic person, because anything they take no personal responsibility for anything. Anything negative is always someone else's fault. It's always something external.
Part of the environment.
And anything good, even if it was just sheer luck, is because of something I did because I'm so great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's a very dangerous place to get to in that position. So once we have mapped it out, it becomes conscious incompetence. The second level is when you know that thing that you didn't know before, but you're still not really good at it, right? So the whole purpose in taking people through a kinesthetic mapping across is because they themselves, most likely, aren't great at this yet. Even though they've just now identified what anger is, oh, I see what it is now, I can map it, I know how it moves through my body, how it feels, all of that, I'm still not good at this. I've just learned this, right? So that's conscious incompetence. I'm still incompetent at this. We want this to get to the subconscious, unconscious level though, so the only way to do that is by training the brain rapidly, by forcing it, okay? So then the next level is conscious competence. That's whenever now I'm aware of that thing. So whenever you're working with the person, you're bringing them back and forth, they're going to be capable of recalling those emotional states that we mapped out the first time that was probably kind of difficult for them to be able to give you images and sounds and feelings that are associated with this. By this point now, they're good at it. Like they're getting really good at being able to tell you when they're in a positive emotional state, what that is, how it radiates throughout their body, how it feels, how it flows. So that's conscious competence, but they're still thinking about it. We want them to get to a place of unconscious competence, which is considered the mastery level. At a place of unconscious competence, when they experience anger, their brain will automatically go to that positive state. It will begin generating everything they need. Just like whenever you see somebody sucking on a lemon and your brain activates and you start to salivate and everything, you don't have to teach your brain to do that. It's a conditioned response, your brain already knows to do it. Same thing happens with this. As you begin to shift them from a negative emotional state that they no longer want to that positive emotional state, and you begin to create that limbic system shift, the brain is learning, and that is going to the unconscious competence, where the brain is automatically learning how to do that. Okay? All right, next slide.
Let's take a 5-minute break.
Yeah.